Okay, everybody, good morning.
Good morning.
We'll go ahead and get started, and then we'll make announcements right before the break. And I'm going to try to end right on time so that you have a nice long break, because I know we've been sort of trimming away at the edges there. And I think it's great to network and socialize with each other. Okay, so this session is going to be done in a couple of parts. The first, I'm going to go through a PowerPoint and just get that over with, right? So then we can maybe shut off the projector and not worry about it anymore. The second, we are going to look at the case study, which I think some of you maybe had a chance to at least skim. And then we're going to do, I hope, a fun exercise, and then we're going to hear about your experiences. So is that okay with everyone? Yeah. Great. All right, let's get started. So what we're going to start off with is how can simple financial clubs engender what is called in the buzzword language of development and aid agency, which simply means that you have some kind of control or power over your lives. And we've been talking mostly, so if we look at this 4x4, high agency means I've got a lot of control, and low agency means I have none. And then if I'm operating in an uncertain context, or a very certain context, that changes things. And if I'm operating with a low degree of context certainty, that changes things. And I think we've been talking a lot this week about very unstable contexts, potentially, right? We've been talking about Syria and other places where that environment is absolutely not certain. And we've been talking about, okay, how can we boost the agency in those uncertain environments? But what we're going to address this morning is probably where most of the world lives, most of the time. And that's with peers, I have a little bit of agency, and I'm not always operating in a high degree of certainty, right? Yes, maybe there's rule of law, maybe I have a little bit of access to those laws, but maybe not so much. Or I'm a little bit below this bar. I have, with peers, I have a little bit of agency, but not a lot. And then, of course, there's, even with peers, I don't have agency. And maybe that's because my environment is so unstable. But we've been looking at sort of this side of things. This is a very confident person that says, I don't need anybody, and I live in a very certain world. And that's like 1% of the population. Right? Which is, I can do it all myself. I have my big corporate entity, and there's a lot of certainty because I might be tapping into the rule of law myself in my own way. But most of the world doesn't operate. And as individuals, what I've learned is that we don't make these distinctions so much, right? We're just people. And we don't use these words, and we don't divide it up. We're just there. And so this little case is based on an experience I had where my background is in business, and I was sent to sort of audit this village. I was told that there were a lot of problems there, and they weren't doing the books right. And so that's how I came upon Mankiti, was through a financial lens. So my job was to go through those reams of books. Does everything tally? I'm looking at some ratios, looking at savings, I'm looking at were distributions made properly? And then, of course, I missed the whole point, right? I missed the point because I was looking at something through my lens. And I think a lot of us miss the point because we're coming at things from a human rights perspective, or we're coming at them from a development perspective, or we're coming at them from a peace-building perspective, or who knows what. And then we see everything through that lens, and we miss the point. Because the people that are there are just doing their thing. And they're trying to survive in a world that's got a lot of uncertainty, and they sense that maybe they have to join together with peers to get a little more agency. So, again, that's what we're going to talk about this morning. Some of the things we're going to talk about are not useful in highly uncertain environments, or where people have a low degree of agency. So for those of you that aren't interested in that environment because you're operating in extremely difficult ones, maybe just relax and listen. What we might be saying might not be as relevant to you as you would like. Okay, so folk banking. What is it? Well, it's just people coming together, neighbors borrowing and lending. It is savings clubs, like the clubs in Mankiti. It's burial clubs, and I'll show you a video at the end of what that is. Where's our South African? Yes, sure you know all about those. Grocery clubs, also very present in South Africa and highly complex. In the US, we used to have Christmas clubs. These were very common ways of saving up together. And now we have other kinds of apps that help us do that, or we just do it individually in a bank account and we don't really worry about it. So, so what are these? Well, sometimes, do you remember, if we go way back to Reverend Lawson's, to that movie, and Diane West features largely in that, and she's on at the beginning, the middle, at the end, and she says, well, the reason I joined this movement is it was the best game in town. And it's not so much that she was going to choose nonviolent civic resistance, but there was really nothing else. Well, that's true for savings clubs too. It's not like everyone wants to rush into a savings club because it's so much fun. It's because sometimes it's the best way to get things done. And the lack of resources often makes you resourceful, so people are cobbling together money. Simple achievements, quick wins are important, and these clubs do give you that. And my own observation, kind of overriding all this, is that financial self-reliance is part of social self-reliance. And all of it is part of resilience, which again factors into this sort of area. So how do these clubs work? Well, any way you want them to work. Here's a standard way. And when I say standard, this is the way a lot of NGOs and governments promote these clubs, but it's also the way that a lot of clubs just promote themselves. So that could be as simple as some of us just agreeing in the front row to get together and do things. Sometimes it's by force. I'm part of a condo association, and you know, it looks a whole lot like a savings club. We save up in it, we actually make loans from it, and we try not to talk about money because it's so unpleasant, but we do talk about parties in the yard. So it's people coming together, they decide to pool their funds, and this gets them meeting, so it's like a financial hook. When you can tap into people's pocketbooks, you get their interest. A lot of these clubs are women or mostly women, but I'm seeing a lot more men clubs now spring up because they're going, wait, what about me? What about my money? NGOs tend not to promote those. And people are interested in cash flow to meet their daily needs, so they save a little bit, they borrow a little bit. And then they have a chance at some point to get a lump sum. Sometimes the club decides to distribute all of its money back out to everybody. And the money is used for whatever individual members want to. Sometimes in very controlled situation, like the grocery clubs I saw in South Africa, it's very specific what you can use the money that you contribute for. And it has to be buying communal resources for the month of December. And it is, they'll say exactly what brands everybody has to buy in the beginning of December. So it isn't distributed in the form of money. You have to go buy things with the money from the club, and the club makes certain you buy exactly what they tell you. But most are much more individual, whatever you want to borrow for. So are they quaint? Well, if they are, there's a lot of them. These are just ones that people can count. But remember, there's tons of these things going on out there in the wild that no one's counting. So these are just the ones that people are going, you exist, and you exist. They're highly customized. This woman is from a club I visited in Assam, India. I spent a couple of days with them. And they, some of them belonged to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, up to 14 different clubs. And they used each club as a financial instrument, right? So some were long-term investments, some were like, no, let's just chip in a little bit and help meet our daily needs. Many were managed by a manager who made his living managing these clubs. And he would match star savers with star borrowers to make sure that enough people were borrowing from the club to generate a lot of interest, right? So generate income. By the way, some of these clubs charge 0 interest, and some of them charge up to, I've seen up to 20, 25% interest. It depends. Sometimes they make sure that anybody that borrows is from the club itself, and sometimes they lend to the outside, to people that are not in the club. And if it's to the outside, they usually charge more. But there's a lot of customization involved. They flex and change. Okay, so I'm going to just give you a couple of examples. This is a club in Haiti that I met before the earthquake and tracked during the earthquake. I happened to be in Port-au-Prince when the earthquake struck and was able to get one text out to this person in the middle to see if the club was okay, because I had been meeting with them the day before. And they sprang to action around the earthquake because they were already unified. They've been, as you can see, they're keeping their books, they're making decisions together, and it kind of makes sense for them to do something together. So they helped bring people back that were away from Port-au-Prince back to help with reconstruction, and some of them fled the city to go to the countryside, but they were tracking members the whole time. Okay, let me skip this, because I want to get to this at the end. Okay, this is an example of a club in the a self-help group, which is a little bit like a savings club. And they were very much about painting things to encourage members. And they were doing this in conjunction with an NGO, but you can see it was about basically empowering women. And I enjoy the spelling there. And this one really struck me. A big problem in that part of India is, what's the word for it, Kanika? It's called permanent dowry, or? Okay, so you don't just pay a dowry once. You get married, and then your mother-in-law basically extorts you for more money. So the idea is, okay, one-time dowry, that's one thing, but if the daughter-in-law is constantly being pestered for dowry, you have to stop. But it's in the lowlands of Odisha or Orissa, it's very prevalent. Okay, some other examples. This gentleman is Charles Aranje, and he is president of the Gatwakira Railway Savings Club in Kibera. And during the violence, this club, by the way, had hundreds of members. So I've been saying 10 to 20, but actually it had hundreds of members, all from the slum of Kibera. And during the post-election violence, they fled to the countryside. Many of their homes were burned. And so through M-Pesa, a lot of you know what M-Pesa is. It's essentially a service that you can use on your phone to send money around. They used M-Pesa to make their contributions even though they were very far from Nairobi, and were able to reconstruct. So again, this isn't exactly resistance, it's coping. And here's just how some of these clubs manage themselves. This one in northern Ghana is just using a simple way of stamps. Members put in a certain amount of money, and then they get a stamp. And that's how they keep track. In Cambodia, this is a photo of a club that is a women's club that actually is resisting. And they are demanding clean water in their village because the villages nearby have gotten it and they haven't. And they were extremely vocal, and they got the water. In Mali, this is how some of the clubs keep track. You can see the money, but you can also see the stones. The stones count for X number of pieces of currency, which I think it's one of the CFA currencies in Mali. But so a person knows exactly how much they've given. They carry back their bags of stone. So, and that shows that in illiterate environments where people aren't that literate, they can still do these, right? So I've been showing photos of books and bookkeeping and all this elaborate stuff, but you don't have to do it that way. It can be really, really simple. So, and let me finish with two short videos from South Africa. And this, she's describing, she runs both a burial club and a savings club. And you can see that she is, by the furniture in the background, that she's middle class. So you know, a lot of the photos I showed people that are really not well off. But in countries like Nigeria, a lot of people, in fact, people that have attended this course, participate in the local savings clubs. This is kind of what everybody does. And what I learned is in Nigeria, if you're a member of the central bank and you have a club, you're very respected, and people really try to get into your club first. And this is from Laz Apiri. So yeah, he's like, yeah, oh, that's the best. If you've got a regulator in your club, you really want to be in that club. So this just shows you a little bit of tough love.
Let's come together and help each other in the event of death or anything. So that's how we came together. All the ACPs of this village.
So you're trusting everyone?
We are trusting everyone. Since that time, it's a long time. We are here from 1989. Our children were young then. Today they have kids here. Some of them are married, some of them are doing this. They were still young. When we started, these houses were 4, 5. Today you see the whole area.
So what happened when the new people moved in? You invited them?
Yes, you invite them, but now you pay, we call it because very bad, because 600 right, okay. Joining fee, there's a joining fee, because you find us our bookstore more than maybe 48,000. So you have to join with someone, maybe 10,000. You pay it within 6 months, because you'll be on trial for 6 months. Yes, we call it a trial. You can't come this week and then next week you have the death and then we must pay our money to you. No, it takes.
Okay. Oh no, it's gonna do. I don't like it when you do. Sorry, that's unrelated.
Irrespective of how many children you have, to make this an overall.
You register after your 6 months, and you can add them.
It is. You just give us the name.
Not after 6 months. Oh, even starting.
Yeah, when starting, you give us the name and everything, but we only bury them after 6 months.
So it's a burial club.
So this one is not the concern one that ladies told you about. This is the big society of the area. The one you people are interested in, the grocery one, we are also members of that.
So just to finish on this one, what happens when you decide to leave? Like maybe you're moving
You forfeit your own,
your 3,000
forfeit everything. Is not our problem that we are moving. It's your problem.
So you're insured while you're here.
Yes. But if you move to
Okay, so she's actually quite disciplined. So we've been hearing about, over the course of the week, these are some of the concepts that we heard from different speakers. And so based on the video you just saw and on the case, the case of Mankiti, and I'm going to actually ask somebody in a moment to summarize that, but can we say that some of these things are being followed? And if so, which ones? These are key principles of the week. Strategic, disciplined, requires planning and preparation, unity, simple rules, voluntary.
All of them.
You would say all of them. Would anybody disagree? So when I first came to FSI a couple of years ago, I was listening, I think it was to Hardy's presentation, and I was like, wait a minute, I was trained in business. This is exactly what makes businesses work. So maybe these are the very things that make anything work well. It dawned on me because I was like, well, gee, this kind of comes straight out of a Harvard Business School case study of, what to do right. Even the concept of simple rules was written up in the Harvard Business Review, and that we heard Yvonne talk about. Planning and preparation, strategic. This I want to question a little bit towards the end. Are these totally voluntary? And I have some examples of that. And we also heard Yvonne talk about the SMART objectives, right? And he was saying that's very important to either mount a campaign or even develop a larger vision and strategy. So can we say that some of these things are present? Are these clubs strategic?
They are.
They can be, right? They're probably at the tactical level, and then they kind of go into a charge state if there's something that everybody sets their sights on, which could be an act of resistance. Measurable? I mean, from a financial auditor's perspective, very. Maybe from someone else's, it's not so clear what's really going on. And this is what the former academic dean of Fletcher used to say, and which I always thought was very valuable. Remember, when you're going from the outside and you're visiting somebody that's got their own system going, you are really seeing a visible chessboard. That's the chessboard you want to see. And then there's the invisible chessboard. And that's the game that everyone's playing. And they might be even playing you. So as soon as you enter from the outside, you can't really tell what's going on. So are some of the goals achievable? Yes, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. Relevant? I think so. I'm not really sure what the timely or time-bound part of SMART really meant. I think it was for the world of aid projects, which is you want a goal that you can call time-bound. But I think in real development, where people are continuously reaching for the next step, or perhaps in real resistance, it's hard to say, we know that this is time-bound. Maybe at the end of it, you know it's time-bound. But it's very hard at the beginning to predict when that's going to come.
Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry to give a step back.
Yep.
What was your argument to say it's strategic? I didn't get that.
Okay,
very well.
so, and that's what I'm asking you. Are these clubs strategic?
Maybe to us, up to a certain extent. I mean,
Actually, the original, you're right, Deju. The S really stands for specific. So in that sense, yes. But are they really strategic? Well, they're strategic coping mechanisms, right? They're strategic in that way. I'm not sure they're strategic in the kind of big sense that we've been talking about in the earlier part of the week. Yes?
I think when I'm referring to the case study, initially the self-help groups were set up to address a very practical, tangible need, which is basically to help them cope up in their daily lives because they are so poor. But when you look how they are evolving, they are able to, the government recognize their effort, and so they are able to approach block. This is a governance structure. For me, that is the start of an empowering action. So slowly you can see how these groups are evolving from just addressing
The
practical
basic
needs
financial
to,
needs.
yeah, basic needs to so basically becoming claim-making groups.
So absolutely. So let's summarize the case. Does anybody want to quickly summarize the case? Because I know not all of you got a chance to read it. Yes, Deju?
Well, I think like the one I know in Nigeria, I would say they're strategic because I think that one was quite significant in addressing MDGs because it started from poverty alleviation, livelihoods, and they could actually use those cooperative groups to address issues relating to health, maternal, infant, and then education and stuff like that. So I think they were strategic.
Okay, and this is in the case of Nigeria.
Yeah, LAPO.
LAPO.
Yeah.
So does anybody want to quickly summarize the Odisha case, the Mankiti?
Yeah.
Like a lot of stuff, yeah.
the market, the showcase is that you could see it was, just as she rightly said, there was a process, it evolved, it developed, it became, you know, more powerful, they had more voice. And you could see, apparently, the government had some funds which they couldn't, the people, number one, the people were not aware of it. Then when they were aware, they couldn't access it because they were, what was needed to access, you know, you have to keep your books. So they couldn't, they were illiterate, they didn't know how to keep their books. So here came the Reverend Father, Father Joy,
Yeah.
was able to, he was, what's it called? Was employing some people who are literate to keep the books for them. So, you know, he was bearing that, was bearing the payment of that, you know, was not giving back to them. So you now notice that that was able to, you know, organize them. So outside the money banking, they were now doing other projects like roads, you know, they were giving time for roads and, you know, basically that's it.
And so exactly. So I think you two have summarized it nicely. That Father Joy, and so here's his photo right here. He's the man to your left. He is the bridge, and we discussed this a little bit earlier in the week, right? That sometimes you need that bridge person, because to whatever, spread information, keep people alert and on cue, and or just a contact, right? So maybe Father Joy doesn't have a lot of contacts in the block, but he's got a way, he's got some agency, right? And so he can be that bridge, because these are people that are living in the Gadaba and the Mankiti groups are living in a lot of isolation. So sometimes a bridge is really important. We can't just expect people to say, okay, I'm gonna farm my cashews, and then I'm just gonna figure out how to connect to the block that's 25 kilometers away. So he served as a bridge. This is Sukrasisa, and you can see that she is looks very dynamic, and she is a very dynamic person. And she's the one that was like, all right, I'm going to save in my group. I'm going to even save. So the savings groups are an alternative, but they've created an alternative to the alternative, right? They have those other savings groups. So they have ones to keep the government happy, and let's get our government benefits, and we're going to do it according to Hoyle. We're going to keep the books perfectly. Oh, and then this is the hidden chessboard. Now we have a whole, and by the way, those other set of books didn't come out till the end of my stay there, which is after having drunk a little bit with them, danced a little bit. They were like, all right, we're going to show you our other set of books. And this is our real club. And that's the club that people were putting most of their money in. And even for her, that wasn't good enough. It was like, no. I am saving for some land, and I'm going to bury it in the ground. So here she is. Again, this is a photo of the group, that very group. Here they are. And that's a view taken from the road. So I'm wondering if, Kanika, if you could just give us a little background maybe, and Rizwana, anybody that is familiar with these communities. I know that you're from Madhya Pradesh, and your home, your natal town is very much in the heart of the tribal area.
This particular case that you all have read of Mandakini is of Odisha district of India, which is one of the poorest regions in South Asia, definitely of India. There are various other, you might have heard of the Nyangiri struggle or anti-Bosco struggle, which actually made international headlines, or where the Supreme Court of India said that indigenous people have a right to habitation and cultural rights. So it actually was a big struggle for all over the world as well. This particular area, as well as other parts of India where tribal communities reside, are typically geographically difficult to reach. They're remote areas, and therefore the infrastructure or the government facilities are very few. few, and the hardships are many. People have to walk long distances to reach to the nearest nearest facilities. They sometimes where I work in places, they have to walk some 4 hours to reach the nearest public health facility, or to reach to get even salt for their food. So these are very remote areas. So yeah.
Very isolated, very marginalized, kind of out of the mainstream.
Other part is that another thing that needs to be talked about here is that these are also the areas where Maoist insurgency is very active, and so it complicates the entire situation. People are always in the middle of the government and the Maoists and always suffering. So there is definitely a very violent environment that they live in, marginalization on one hand by the government, and continuous violence of this fight between the government and the Maoists in India. So these are exactly those areas.
And because of that being kind of squeezed between these two pinchers, the government and the Maoists, which I believe are called the Naxalites, or a version thereof, Father Joy chooses to co-opt the government because they need police protection in this village. And so how do they do that? Well, you've already mentioned, they do that by saying they know, because he knows, that the government has funds they're mandated to put into the countryside. So they do all the self-help work, they clear the road, it's backbreaking, and they're able to show the government, all right, you really don't have much of an excuse not to tar this road for us. And they don't. And then that ushers in a lot of services that they wouldn't normally have. So his strategy is not, in this particular case, to resist the government, although these groups have been mobilized to resist. A little north of this area, or east, a lot of groups got together around a dam, and it was an absolutely clear act of defiance. We're talking about gentle acts of defiance, right, in this zone here, gentle acts of defiance. They're not the kind of resistance that we're talking about, but they can be charged to do so. So here we have this bridge. This community is able to start to meet its needs, but it needs these other resources. And that's really just the simple tale of that case. So before we go to our exercises, here's a question for you. What are the dangers possible with these kinds of groups? Some of you I know have worked with them. Yeah. Or threats, or whatever, risks, or any word you'd like to use. Moses.
Well, one of the dangers could be, for example, the response of the members towards repayment of loan, for example. Because there are members who come because they wanted to benefit from the credit or the loan that the group gives. And the groups, in most cases, they only give to members who are members of the group. Sometimes they can also give loan to those who are not members, provided that they have bypassed the 6 months trial period. Now, there are those who sometimes do not honor this kind of rules. So this is one.
So repayment is really, really important. And so the group has to maintain that discipline. And it sounds simple, but it's not. If people come with other agendas and don't intend to repay, it can be a problem.
Within the group, because they know themselves, they're in the same environment, I don't think repayment is that really bad. Okay, once in a while you might have defaulters, but where I usually have noticed problems of repayment is when they are now interfacing with government agencies. In Nigeria, with all the government agencies for low-income, how do you call it now? For the low-income earners, or for people in the hinterland, it has always fought flat on its back. Because when they take the money, some of them will say that, oh, this is the only thing Nigeria has done for me. Some will take the money and go and marry another wife. So, so many things will just happen.
And Kanika, maybe Yeah, and Rizwana, maybe you want to add to that.
No, sorry, I didn't hear you properly, but I was thinking of something else, and which you also mentioned in the article that you wrote, where Father Joy says that it's perhaps better to have someone else to write the records or to keep them maintaining than empowering the women themselves, because that's going to take a lot of time. But in India, in particularly, the model of self-help groups is not looked just from a financial perspective, but it is also a space of collective building. It's also a space where women come together, they demand their rights. So it's not just the financial aspect that should be focused and is being focused. Whereas the kind of SHG model that is being followed, and especially the one that government recognizes, has some 15 records, 16 record books that women have to maintain, and that completely excludes a lot of people. That is a burden on them. So
And
this is a big danger.
it's a huge danger that the government co-ops either for its own purposes, political purposes, right? Or it quashes the group's own empowerment. And I think I saw that in a very pronounced way in Bihar, where there's the Jivika program. And so one of the dangers is if the government co-ops, it's hard to escape these groups. So in the state of Bihar, it's impossible not to belong to a group. So that's why I want to go back to that voluntary question. At a certain point, this very beautiful idea the government has taken over, and you can't get away. If you're in a village, you cannot opt out of being a group, or that means you've opted out of being health services, schools, a whole host of services. People, now the government's saying you have to belong to a group. And in the state of Bihar, the World Bank has funded that, and it's like a giant steamroller. Rizwana.
I'm from a country where Grameen Bank exists.
Oh,
right. So after so many years, the government realized that they need to pass a bill in the parliament, the Microfinance Act. So we do have self-help group in different parts of the area of our country, but they are not aware of this existing act. With this organization, any small lending, any small this kind of self-help group or village development organization, they have to have microfinance certificate or license to do this kind of small lending process. Being a lawyer, I've been working with this kind of around 200, like we call it video development, village development organization. And it's their money, they're doing everything. So I raised some question about the transparency and the accountability, that who are the signatory, that if they keep the money in the bank. So, but you have to have the microfinance license. And when you go to a regulatory body, it is not that easy to get a license, and then you have to have an audit issue, that you have to do the audit. So in our country, anything comes under the regulatory regime.
So I'm hearing you say opposite things, actually, because you're saying that the government, you must see transparency, and I'm hearing that in India, maybe there's too much government emphasis on transparency. And so, again, where's the agency of the group in this? I saw a couple, yeah, Daniel. In Venezuela, yes, so some good examples.
We have interesting examples of these types of groups. We have the SAN, which is a sort of
a rotating club?
Yeah, rotating community club, where it's a way of saving. Not many people are in banks, or not, that's one of the things we have. We also have burial clubs, quite similar to this, and especially in rural towns and in rural areas. And I do see some dangers that we have there, like internally, corruption is a big one. And you do have traditional groups where the government is not at all present. But lately, the government has tried to implement a communal system where it does get involved, and the funding comes directly from the government. And that leads the way, especially in the early years where there was no control, to a lot of corruption. And externally, I can see a big threat in the general overall economic situation of the country. Because if you have a savings fund and inflation is way over 100%, then that money becomes salt and water, as we say.
So what I've seen in some countries dealing with inflation, they bring things instead. And so, and they rotate those things. So some groups just rotate money around, and some groups actually pool it over time. Yes, Anna. And then someone.
I remember that in Armenia, a post-Soviet country, where poverty just fell on the people, these mechanisms started to be implemented, and those were mostly top-down things. It wasn't like, there was poverty, but it wasn't that the people just got organized and made up these schemes on their own. And what happened was that a migration that started pouring the country with this transfer money, transfer cash, became an alternative to anything else. So it became a quick method of eradicating poverty, but then eventually it ended up with basically emptying the country, because then whoever goes then takes the family with them. And so we have a situation now where people just don't even don't want to take the risk. There's an easy way of tackling this issue, which is migration. They don't even have to consider like making a collective rules, abiding by them, etc. And the banks have actually taken advantage of this. I mean, there's incredible penetration of banks into like the private lives of people.
That's interesting. I know Armenia a little bit. I'd actually love to talk with you during break about that, because so what I saw, yes, Bergeline, before.
Yes, in Cameroon we have such funding group, and it is called, we call them Njangi. Njangi is a word meaning that you help me, I'll help you. A sort of, you scratch my back and I scratch yours. So it's a group, it depends on the size. You can have 10, you can have 20, you can have, it depends on the size. And it's mostly is built by women, poor women. And they put all their money together and give to one person to run something. And next month she came and give it back, they collect it again and give it to another one. And
it sounds like the sun, actually.
Yes, so, and every woman have to
in
benefit
Venezuela
from that loan and run something to feed the family, to send children to school, to help brothers-in-law, the family, and so on. And most of the risk we are used to, because even me, I run such a group, the risk inside the groups most of the time are the one leading the group. Most of the time they are the one who knows how to read, how to write, and official exchanges with banks or with government. And they take that case, that advantage to, how can I say, maybe it's not the word, to crook the group. So most of, we have cases that because the other don't know how to read, the other don't know what is happening, the leaders take the money and keep them for themselves, yes.
So this is a huge risk, I'm hearing a lot of you say. Yeah.
I just want to share one example of what we have. And we have a couple of this, because Afghanistan is also like a post-Soviet Union country. We have this agriculture, cooperatives, microcredit unions, and all that. One of the examples we had was a cooperative for police. So the system there was working in a way that Ministry of Interior was cutting 2.5% of the salary of police, which it was cut actually from 165,000 police of Afghanistan. And instead, all this money came to one institution, which was managed by the government. Some of the goods that they were selling in a lower price compared to the market, because they didn't pay tax. It was tax exempted and all that. But what we found is that there were only limited people of number who had access to it. Like out of 34 provinces that Afghanistan had, this cooperative existed only in Kabul, and people who were having duty in other places, they never benefited from this. And the other risk that we found is that usually these kind of institutions, they are not well managed, and there is a high risk of corruption that people can simply manipulate the system, data, information, and they can use the money. And after a lot of trial that we did, finally last year, late 2014, we closed this cooperative, and no one is now cutting this 2.5% of the salary. So that was one of the
And I've also seen some clubs that work very well, very organically. So self-made clubs. So this is a big, and someone, I think you had a comment too.
So I see two major dangers in this kind of this sort of groups, especially in Nepal. So these groups are really community based. So now in Nepal we see like political parties trying to get these groups into their political network because it's really good to have their influence in the community. And different political parties try to expand their network in one group, and it's like actually eroding the value of these groups and trying to split up those groups into many different subgroups. That political influence is literally affecting these groups in our country. That's one challenge. And another challenge is, as like Punika said and Rijwana said, in Nepal too, now these groups have to go through a lot of different government procedures to become transparent, to follow financial rules and regulations and things like that. And it's a huge burden for them. And there are where these, rural development banks are playing in. So they're going to these old groups. They're saying, hey, it's a burden for you. Why don't you help us? Why don't you let us help you? So you come save your money in us. Your group will run along, but we will facilitate you to do all these government regulations and procedures. So doing that, almost like out of 100, almost like 70% of return, these rural development banks takes away out of 100. So that's a big challenge for them.
So you've got a mix of invaders.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there are a lot of invaders.
And I just want to, Ahmed.
I'll just add something to what Virgilin said. I mean, there is, for example, if the people want much money to fulfill their needs, so there is a form in the south of Afghanistan and most parts of Pakistan, they call it committee. I mean, the group of people, they form a group. For example, there are 10 people. They collect, for example, $100 per month. So it becomes $1,000.
It's like the sun. It's the.
So this amount of money, they can fulfill their needs, whatever they want to do. So each month they add $100, and each month a person can get $1,000. So for 10 months, like for example, each month they make a toss that this month who will get this money. So it is that's quite transparent. And there is transparency as well in this case. And so far it is operational, it's active, and quite successful phenomenon.
So these are perhaps the most easiest to form. Yeah. And what you're saying is if you put in $10 a month, everybody gets a turn, because every week, if there's 10 people here, I'm not sure how many to put, there's a pot, right? And somebody, so let's say this is the first person, takes the whole pot home. So it's like if you saved yourself, but why would you do that? Why would you bother? I can just save all this money on my own. Why would I do this crazy thing?
What you're putting in the pot is a fraction of your earning now. If you have to save up to that, you have a project, that means you have to save all your earnings. That means the pressure is more on you. But the aggregate of small contribution. But one thing I want to say again is that in Nigeria, in the hinterland, that's in the villages, it's more organized and it's not abused. But in the towns, because you don't know where the man that comes to collect it comes from, they run away with the money. Many times they just
So,
run
so
away
if
from
you're
it.
at the end, if you're the first person that received the money,
Yes.
you can just run away.
No, you are, that's what I'm saying. If you're in the village,
Yeah.
everybody knows you have a
Oh,
fixed address.
okay, but if you're in the urban areas,
Yes.
and so I've seen people address this in the urban areas by saying, if you're a new person to us, you're the last person to get your 100.
You know, there are two layers in the urban centers as well. You know, for the middle earners, you know, they usually don't know who brings, the person just come and organizes them. Then they start doing it, does it for about 2 years, everybody's comfortable. One day the guy feels like to be running away. But if you're talking of the upper class, you know, they know themselves, it's friends. You don't have an outsider, we know ourselves as friends, you know. And basically they do that, maybe someone wants to buy a car, you don't, you know, because there's no interest. No, they don't pay interest. Somebody wants to buy a car, they want to do weddings for somebody. So, you know, just do all these collections.
Corinne?
So in South Africa, these are called stokvels. And there was actually a great soap opera called Stokvel, which is really funny. But so what often happens is a lot of the same thing is there's a lot of pyramid schemes where people pretend to be running a stokvel and come in, and if you don't know, it's in the urban areas where you don't know people often, there is a lot more risk. And the strength in these stokvels is that it's community run, and if there's either no interest or the interest is going into the person who's running the stokvel, and so it's putting money into the community, but because of all the risks, the banks have picked up on this. And now banks actually run stokvels. So they give people the opportunity to bring the stokvel to the bank.
Yes.
And then that revenue, which used to
Wow.
go into the community, now goes into the bank.
Really?
That's what I was saying about Nepal too.
Okay, so the banks are really coming in, because my example was going to be Niger on that, where the banks immediately started seizing on these groups and co-opted them. I didn't know that was going on in South Africa.
That they actually don't say like they're invading, they say we're helping you.
Of course.
To follow through all government process so that you don't have
In Nigeria too?
They call them microfinance banks, and since the government has licensed, and they have these equity contributions, and then they're seizing in on all these groups whom their only collateral is trust within the community. You know, like the Lapo. Lapo is just a model of the Brahmin bank.
But, okay, I'd love during break to talk to some of you about this bank encroachment. And then I'll tell you during break why, because I think it's a really critical issue of this kind of co-option and this kind. And then I'm just going to add the last one, which is NGOs. We think they're also lovely, but in this case, it's not that they're co-opting them for profit. It's not that they're co-opting them for political reasons. Why and how do NGOs co-opt these groups? Let me count the ways.
There's so many NGOs with so many
Yeah.
different interests.
Yeah, so a big threat I'm going to add to this list is NGO co-option. So you saw Father Joy, right, very benevolently making this bridge, and then the groups exist. Well, and he's working with an NGO called SWAD. What could happen, which to my knowledge has not happened, but I've seen happen a lot? Harold.
Well, I've seen village savings and loan associations being formed under the leadership of an NGO or under the guidance of an NGO. But in a situation where you might have political instability, often you have an NGO leaving the country, and that creates a vacuum, and then you have a management crisis within the VSLA. And that's one example that I see relevant in.
So you've worked with VSLAs. Yes, you've seen it. Bergeline?
I think the problem with the NGO is that they bring a lot of money and another way to function. And that way, the English word I want to say scatter. It changed their way of perceiving it and even to run the association. So the NGO bring another way of, I say, thinking, another way of thinking, another way of acting. And
Right, exactly.
disturb.
And I think Harold is saying with the VSLAs, so that follows a very specific formula, the village savings and lending, that are being promoted by the very large NGOs.
And even this money they bring, since they are since there is not the money that they are the one putting in place, it becomes sort of everybody wants to eat the money, everybody wants to earn the money.
So yeah, so they bring in money. The whole point of these groups is that they mobilize their own resources, right? For resistance purposes, for coping purposes, you name it. Those purposes change based on their circumstances. The NGO comes in and says, well, okay, first of all, we're going to give you a recipe for success. And it might not be how people do things. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to give you funds for a project, because now that the NGO has formed the group, who wants to let it go? So not in Father Joy's group, but I did see on the same visit. By the way, I lived for 4 years in India, so I saw a lot of these groups, and I saw this happen over and over again. The NGO just wants to hug this group to death because they're a nodal point for some kind of distribution, right? So they can go out, they're like, okay, you'll now be our health group. And so they start, I call it collaring and heaping, because that's really what it looks like. It's like, okay, I'm going to lasso these groups back into my fold, and now you're going to be part of my project, my agriculture project, my health project, my water project. And then pretty soon, that group is like the most unempowered thing. They are just recipients of development aid. And so this really, these are like the two big problems I see. And then all of a sudden the group becomes projectized. And that's just what Shaksa was talking about yesterday, that becomes, yeah, Clarita.
I work with Oxfam, so I become very uncomfortable when I hear NGO, because we support really big partners in Bangladesh. Like for a long time we have been supporting BRAC, and before that Grameen Bank, and then we phased out because we feel that they are already capable of doing things on their own. What I want to say is donors like Oxfam should really be very careful and should seek accountability from these NGOs. Recently in Myanmar, in Burma, we did an evaluation and we found out among the self-help groups, they become elite in themselves, and so there is also exclusion. So when our independent consultant was asking, why is this woman not included, when in fact she is single-headed, she's alone in the house supporting 3 children, why is she not included in your savings group? And the group cannot really respond. So that risk of exclusion is also there, especially of very, very vulnerable women, or even members of, in South Africa, we have seen the exclusion of women and men who are HIV/AIDS positive, or who are already suffering from sickness. So one, there's a risk of exclusion. So if we are not careful, the most needy or the poorest of the poor we are excluding. And then the second finding that we discovered was that instead of really uplifting them from poverty, a number of the households were being drawn into indebtedness. So their debts kept on increasing. So it's really violating this do no harm principle, because there was no proper assessment made. Why was this, happening? So let us not romanticize that microfinance or savings group can uplift everyone from poverty, because there are households that were really even became poorer because of this activities.
And this is not researched enough. This issue of exclusion being one, but the indebtedness of specific members. So some people are using these loans for consumption, right? But by consumption, I mean food. They're using it to buy a meal, and they're paying interest on it. Some members are net savers, right? They don't really have to borrow. So it's really nice. You're borrowing from me, and I'm charging you a lot of money. So imagine there's groups that are out of kilter on that front. And we don't know who the winners and losers are. Nobody tracks, nobody ever looks at that. And I think it's a serious problem. Yvonne, did you have your hand up?
I mean, even if we look at like the lower classes, like in any country, what usually research doesn't look at is the upper class within the lower class, and the role they play in these things, because there is a lot of how shall I say, inequality that is happening on that level. But when we look at the whole country, we just look at the, how shall I say, these broad categories. But within the lower class category, there is also like big social, how shall I say, stratification as well.
Yeah. And a lot of it has to do
that.
around literacy, which it's part and parcel of that. Okay, so what we're going to do now is you each have some money that I gave you, very benevolently. Okay, we're going to count off. We're going to count off in. We're going to count off in sixes, and we're going to start with Nico.